FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
This episode of the Financial Survival Network is brought to you in part by Sandstorm Gold Royalties. Sandstorm Gold Royalties is a different kind of gold company. They purchase royalties on select mining operations and receive a percentage of the revenue in return. Sandstorm now has a portfolio of over 185 gold royalties around the world. See how gold royalties differ from other gold mining investments at sandstormgold.com. That's sandstormgold.com. Sandstorm Gold Royalties trades on the TSX as SSL and on the New York Stock Exchange American as SAND.
Welcome, and you are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. It's 10/23/18, and only really 2 more months of this year left to go, but so much has happened. And one thing is a movie that you're going to find out more about in a moment. But first, we invite you to be part of the show. Love to hear your views, your opinions, your thoughts. KL@kerrylutz.com is the email address. So you've probably been hearing about this movie well, I'm going to let our guest tell you about it, called Gosnell. And it's a shocking story. It's really heartbreaking in a lot of ways, and somehow the story has come out. Phelim McAleer is with us now. Phelim, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Kerry. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, so the movie's about abortion, obviously. It's about this guy who did untold acts of infanticide, late-term abortions, every travesty kind of that you could imagine.
I'd interrupt you there. The movie's about a serial killer, actually.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about abortion. The movie's called Gosnell, the Trial of America's Biggest Serial Killer. Mm-hmm. The guy is serving 3 life sentences.
Yes.
Huntington Correctional Institute. The grand jury indicted him for 7 murders. They wanted to indict him for 100.
Yes.
It's thought he killed hundreds, if not thousands. He also killed several patients.
We know.
He's a serial killer. It's
Okay.
This is it's not. It's not about abortion, but it's also about abortion. But it's also about a serial killer, a man who killed. But it's also about the cover up, how he was allowed to kill.
Yeah.
Because he was allowed to kill for years. For politics.
With the knowledge, and I was building up to that. Hey, when does abortion stop being abortion and the person becomes a serial killer? And in this case, we have no idea how many lives he took or anything else. But he did it in open view of the entire world. It wasn't like it was a secret here. You mentioned that even former Governor Tom Ridge knew about it, and they just kind of looked the other way. How did that happen?
Well, Tom Ridge was elected as a so-called pro-choice Republican, and until he was elected, every abortion clinic in Pennsylvania had to be inspected every year. Physically, you had to walk in and look around it. That was the law. When he got elected as a pro-choice Republican, he got his lawyers to look at that law and decided that law didn't say what it actually said. He decided that law said you don't have to look at an abortion clinic every year. And so he stopped the inspections. They were inspecting nail clinics up the street and closing them down. For the wrong chemicals or too much dust or whatever it was. And the bodies were literally piling up in Gosnell's basement. The bodies were literally being carried out. He was killing patients one after another, killing them. And nobody cared. Nobody seemed to. One of his victims, Carmine Munger, was a Bhutanese refugee. She spent 20 years in a refugee camp. And then she spent 20 years in a refugee camp. She came to Philadelphia, or she came to America. Within 4 months, she was dead in Gosnell's clinic. This is and there was the Democratic establishment in Philadelphia didn't care. I mean, this is a classic Democratic victim, a woman of color, a refugee seeking an abortion in Philadelphia, sanctuary city. Well, I'll tell you, there was no sanctuary for Carmine Munger. There was no sanctuary for her. When it came in the league table of who gets to be the victim. Abortion trumps everything, and she was sacrificed for so-called abortion rights.
Terrible. So how did you come across this and decide that it had to be a movie?
I made a documentary about fracking, and fracking's big in Pennsylvania. So I happened to be in Pennsylvania, and I was there, and I had a couple of days off in Philadelphia, and I thought, what'll I do on my days off? I looked at the local newspaper, and there I saw the Gosnell Trial, a local newspaper, local story, and I thought that looks interesting. So I went down to the courthouse, and there in front of me was, pictures on the wall, the most amazing pictures I ever seen. Sitting in the stand was a witness giving the most amazing evidence I'd ever heard. And there was Gosnell a few feet away from me, but the most shocking thing of all was behind me was the empty row after row after row of empty press benches. I just couldn't believe that the media wasn't covering this story. The local media were, but the national media weren't.
And so this is just a cover-up? Did you ever talk to any of the national media and say, why aren't you here? Why aren't you covering this story?
Yeah, they claimed that they got it wrong. Many of them claimed they got it wrong. And many of them admitted, we didn't cover it because we're pro-choice and we don't like covering things about abortion. And some of them said I was too gory or whatever. But, the media don't want to cover something that will make abortion look bad, and I'm not, they may not realize it, but they tend to shy away from such stories. So that's that's what they admitted, and they promised to do better next time. But of course, when this film came out, they all just forgot to review it.
Yeah, they all forgot, huh? Did you get any mainstream media exposure for this?
We got 400 words in the LA Times, and that was it.
That was it? Well, what did the LA Times have to say?
I don't think they watched the film. You could actually have written the review from watching the trailer. I think the guy watched the trailer. I'm not being paranoid. If you read the review, there's nothing about the film in it that you wouldn't know from the trailer. And I'm very suspicious that he didn't watch the film.
He never watched it, huh? That's not journalism. I mean, it's a horrible enough story. The government turned its eyes on it. But before Tom Ridge, were they onto this Gosnell person at all?
No. I mean, they were onto him, but abortion is a sacred space. This guy was involved in something called the Mother's Day Massacre in 1972, where 15 women of color actually were mutilated in an experimental abortion technique that involving blades, and he was involved in that. One guy was prosecuted, but Gosnell fled, went to the Bahamas, came back, but then he was Young Philadelphian of the Year, nominated for that. He ran a clinic in plain sight. The only reason he was caught was because he was selling opioids, and it was a drugs raid that caught him. Really?
So he was just pure evil, this person. And what about interviews with him? What have we learned about him since?
Well, I've interviewed him in prison with my wife, and he's charming. He is, he's a charming sociopath. He came in like he'd just come off a round of golf, sat in front of me and my wife, but sat in front of my wife, not in front of me, and spent most of the interview putting his hand on my wife's knee. So he's a charming psychopath with a lot of creepy tendencies also.
He reminds me of that Anthony Perkins character, Hannibal Lecter almost, and he has no remorse whatsoever.
No, he believes he's innocent. History will vindicate him. And he's doing a lot of training in prison because he's going to run a triathlon when he gets out.
He thinks he's going to get out. He really believes he's going to get out of prison?
Absolutely. History is going to vindicate him.
Yeah, well, I guess it depends who writes the history, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does indeed.
Yeah. So what do you learn from it? What do you think the biggest lesson of this whole debacle, this mass murder? What can we as society learn from it?
I think that there should be that the law should be filled. I think the idea that you need more regulation in life rather than less is nonsense, because when the government decides not to follow the regulation, they just don't follow it. So there's don't think that more regulation is a solution. It makes you feel safe. It doesn't mean you are safe.
Yeah.
Gosnell should never have run an abortion clinic. He wasn't an OBGYN. Gosnell had no nurses on staff. Gosnell had cats roaming around his clinic. Gosnell had multiple complaints. He had 2 people die, one a refugee, one an African American. Nobody went into his clinic to even inspect if there was anything wrong. So we're talking about a man who was killing in plain sight, and the authorities allowed him to do so.
Yeah. So what about the neighbors? Did the neighbors have any idea what was going on here?
Funny, they said they didn't. They used to see people coming in and going out, but it was all done behind closed doors.
Mm. And these people who died, weren't their families? Didn't they go after them? Was there any?
Well, a refugee family who didn't speak English from out of state. Another family, they happened to hire a bad lawyer who cheated them out of any claim that they would have. And it's hard to sue a doctor. It's hard if you haven't got the means.
Yeah, for sure. I understand that. So, do you think his exposure? Do you think there's other Gosnells out there doing the same thing?
Undoubtedly. In fact, we know there's one in New Orleans, and there's one in Delaware. We know there's one in Texas from various investigations, and they seem to all use the same technique: unqualified staff, killing babies born alive. It's very interesting. They must all go to some kind of central convention where they learn how to be killers because they all do the same things.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. It's hard to believe that this could happen in America now, but I guess so. And so, what's your next project? Are you going to stay on the subject, or are you going to move on?
I think we're going to move on. I mean, I did a play about Ferguson. I did a play about a court about the biggest fraud on the planet, where a lawyer sued Chevron Oil Company and got $18 billion, and it turned out to be a fraud. So I like taking these real life crime cases and dramatizing them.
Interesting. So after you get done with something like this, you probably need a vacation. You must be emotionally exhausted from it, because you kind of relive it when you're doing this, don't you?
Totally. It's a tough gig, but it's an honor to tell the stories of these people who died, because no one else was going to tell their story, and their stories deserve to be preserved and told.
Yeah, and when you're undertaking something like this, so obviously a lot of research is done. You talk to the witnesses, you talk to the people in the government who were supposed to be watching out and stopping these types of atrocities. And when you talk to the government, what do they tell you?
A lot of them won't comment. A lot of them say, "Oh, we'll do better next time." But the abortion, no one wants to go in on abortion. No one wants to rattle that cage, and people are dying as a result.
Yeah, and when you talk to these people, they feel they have no responsibility for the outcome here, for the consequences.
Well, as one of the people from the Department of Health told the grand jury, accidents happen. People die. So the grand jury hated that. She was so callous and indifferent. Look, it's a medical procedure. People die. She was, it's almost part of the cost of doing business in the medical world. And they were just appalled that she had such a casual and indifferent attitude to people's death.
That's the most remarkable thing, is the brazenness, the just hardness to the core, that just no humanity here, that you could see this happen and allow it to happen, and yet never feel like you had a role in its happening.
Yeah, it's they're quite an outfit, the Department of Health. But you should read the grand jury report. You'd been better off choosing 100 people from a bus stop and getting them to run the Department of Health. They would have more empathy and common sense than the Department of Health officials who were actually there.
Hey, and what about the jurors? So they really got the final word here, besides the judge who sentenced him. The jurors, what was their take on the whole thing?
Well, the jurors, funny enough, they were all, you weren't allowed to be on the jury if you were pro-life. Well, the grand jury, they wanted to prosecute Gosnell. The grand jury, they wanted to indict Gosnell for 100 killings, and they wanted to indict him for 100 killings, but they were stopped by the police who didn't want a spike in their homicide statistics. The actual jury in the courtroom, the jury in the courtroom, they were purged. You weren't allowed to be pro-life and be on the jury. By the end of the trial, the jury had their pro-choice beliefs shattered to the core. Many of them were no longer pro-choice, pro-abortion.
So well, you're doing a real service getting this story out. It's so disturbing. It's so horrifying on so many different levels, and it leaves you kind of shaking your head, because I remember the trial. I didn't really know anything about it, and I just remember the testimony coming out. And even though the mainstream media didn't cover it, it was covered pretty well. And you just couldn't believe that in a so-called civilized country, somebody could get away with this for the amount of time. How long was he doing this for?
30 years, from the early 70s.
30 years. And yeah, so you see the value of regulation here and so many other issues that this brings. And he was doing it in a clinic and, with all the trappings of legal, medical professional, and it just goes on forever. What was the final thing that led to his apprehension and prosecution?
Well, he was selling opioids, and it was a drug investigation that caught him in the end. They went in under a drugs warrant and found a house of horrors.
Yeah. So of all the ironies, it's like Al Capone getting him for tax evasion, but at least he got prosecuted for murder, was convicted, and the story's coming out. You can't hide a story like this. Hey, what's the website for the movie, by the way?
Gosnellmovie.com.
Gosnellmovie.com, and there'll be a link to it in our show notes. Hey, Phelim, really appreciate your coming on. Best of luck with the movie, and I can't wait to see your next project.
Thanks, Kerry. Thanks very much.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.